Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Manspeak. Manspeak is an offshoot to our Heart Warrior series, where some of our Heart Warriors come back and have a whole episode speaking about a topic they're particularly passionate about, embodied in, and can teach and give us some knowledge and wisdom in. And today we have the return of our number 97 Heart Warrior, and that is David Sereda. Now, David is he's an author, he's a loving father, he is a technologies developer, inventor, and he is a free thinking physicist, consciousness explorer. And he's also a much loved and respected guest on the Lazarus Initiative. So, really thrilled to have David back here. And his chosen subject is the kiss of love, life, death, and enlightenment. So excited to see where this goes. And whichever direction it goes in, I'm sure it will be very exciting and full of wisdom and enlightenment. So great to have you here. Thank you and enjoy. David Sereda, how great to have you back. Thank you. How are you?
Good. And it's amazing the subject we're going to speak about tonight, because I haven't kissed anybody in probably many years since my wife passed away. But it's actually a film that I was going to make, because I was so moved by the different aspects of the kiss, and in our culture we're really only familiar with maybe two of them, kisses of affection, and when you kiss your child on the cheek or on the arm or something like that, and and then you have the romantic kiss, and then you actually have, at the very beginning of the creation in the book of Genesis, God breathes God's spirit into Adam and Eve's nostrils to make them a living spirit. So the spirit is actually in the breath, and the kiss is a transfer of the breath. And I really see this because I practiced a Buddhist-based meditation called Vipassana for over 20 years. And even when a dog barks, they're transferring their spirit through their bark, through their breath, right? But in this Buddhist meditation, you watch the breathing going in and out, and you feel the body breathing. And meditation actually makes us more sensitive because we tune to our senses more. So that means when we use a certain sense, we're more aware and we experience way more than the average person. So if I meditate on sight and just experience sight, what I will see and what I'll observe is much greater than a mind that's in chaos and going like this might pick out a few things it notices in the scene, right? And it's the same with the breath. I mean, when you become incredibly aware of your breathing, then when you kiss someone for whatever reason, you will experience far, far more. And I actually wanted to start out, the first time I was ever kissed, it's kind of a funny story because I was probably only 9 years old, and my brothers and I, there were four of us at the time, were left in an area of San Francisco in our neighborhood, and we ended up in this other family's house waiting for our parents to come home. And this little English girl, I was probably 9 years old, was climbing all over me, and she would kiss me on the cheek, on the forehead, and I went into such ecstasy and bliss. I actually got paralyzed. I couldn't stop her, and all the boys were saying, stop her, make her stop. But I was paralyzed in this incredible sweet ecstasy as a little boy. And it must have lasted for over a half an hour, and I was catatonic. Like, I couldn't even get up. I was literally paralyzed. And then later in grade 6 in Modesto, California, a similar thing happened where I was at a sleepover at a friend of mine's house, and his sister attacked me in the closet, and she did the same thing. She would just kiss me, and I became catatonic and paralyzed. And her brother Robbie White was saying, make her stop, saying to his sister, telling her to stop. And so when your senses are very pure, of course, as a child, a kiss can deliver more potency and pleasure and bliss than a full-grown adult may experience. And so tonight I'm going to go over, there's at least 5 types of kisses. There's the kiss of death, which is really going to take. There's actually the kiss of the transfer of the Spirit of God in enlightenment, which we're going to go into. I'm just giving everybody an abstract. And then there's the kiss of greeting family members or friends. Usually it's on the cheeks, right? Sometimes the forehead. And in some cultures, it's interesting. In Los Angeles, and I lived there from the mid 80s for about 20 something years, the Persian Iranian community, it was quite amazing. They all greeted each other with a kiss. And actually, that's what the early Christians used to do. They always greeted each other with a kiss. And I'm going to actually show people where that comes from. So that's more of a greeting kiss. And it's really amazing. You go into these Persian families' homes, and even the women would greet a guest with a kiss on the cheek, whether it was a man or a woman, right? And then, of course, there's the parental love kiss of the child, right? I mean, and the other day, because I'm sitting in the front seat and my little daughter climbs over me to get some money, and I just rub my nose on her shoulder and I breathe really fast, and it tickles her, right? It's a form. There's many ways a parent can show an affectionate kiss to their child, usually on the cheek or the arm or the shoulder, and they laugh. And that's part of why, but there's a transfer of real energy there, right? And the thing about meditation also is it takes us from the apparent awareness that we're just physical beings with chemical reactions, to becoming aware of energy. And then once you become aware of energy, you don't focus on yourself so much as a physical being. And beyond energy, you can actually sense something higher than energy, which is really pure vibrations that culminate in light, real experience of actual light, right? And that's where the master can kiss a disciple and transfer enlightenment to them. And then, of course, we come all the way to the kiss of romance, or the beginning of romantic love. And the reason I'm talking about this tonight, I realized that our new generation is so swept away by the massive amounts of pornography that have completely circumvented the act of kissing and holding and touching and lovemaking. And that's why I like so many of your posts recently, Gemma, because you're showing images, photographs of men and women in embrace and touch and kissing. And you don't see that anywhere on the internet today. Like, it's gone. It's gone. And to me, it's the greatest loss that we've lost this in our culture, that we're teaching people. In fact, in Europe and many countries, they use pornography as sex education. And that is not sex education, because that's a grotesque form of the final act. It's not everything that leads up to it. And everything that leads up to it for different couples can be a gaze, just a warm look in the eyes, and then holding, and then the kiss. And I actually remember when I met my wife, Crystal, it was the comedian actor Dan Aykroyd who introduced us at the House of Blues in Los Angeles, and sat us across from each other at this table. And then that's the courting, right? That's the looking each other's eyes and having a conversation. And some people, when you talk to them, there's something about the sound of their voice, which is their breathing, which is where their spirit. You see, I really believe this. When we were originally created as a living physical spiritual being in a physical body, it was transferred through the breath, which the ancient Hebrew called the ruach, which is the Spirit of God is in the breath. And that's why in the Buddhist meditation, we focus on the breathing, because that's where the closest thing to our spirit is, right? So in the courting period, when somebody's talking, if the voice sounds right, if the energy is right in the eyes, you start to feel this magic. It's like charm. It's like little bliss balls floating in the air. And nobody else does this to you. You can't explain it. I mean, I've been in situations where I'm on a date or something, or I'm being introduced to a perfectly beautiful woman, but I don't feel anything. And yet another person, you'll feel this magic. And again, we've lost that, right? Because we're saying sex education is the final act, which can last only a matter of minutes, as opposed to what could last, a half an hour to an hour or more. We've said, oh, we don't want to do that. We just want to get right down to business. And I think we've lost everything. We've lost everything because the energy in the eyes and the exchange, and then finally, like even a touch on the hand across the table, because we're actually electrical beings. I can get a common voltmeter and measure voltage off a person's ears, off their fingertips, in fact, almost any part of the body. So when we touch, just like two electrical circuits, that energy moves from one to the other. And sometimes if the wrong person touches us on the hand, it's like, no, I don't like, because not only is there electricity, there is a soul vibration behind the electricity. So you could have dirty electricity or very clean, very pure electricity, or you can just have electricities that are a match or not a match. And you can't explain it. So when I first met my wife, it was a date, and it was just nothing more than a touch on the hand and then a phone number, right? And actually she called me first. All my friends said, don't call her for 2 weeks, because you'll appear too aggressive and she'll get turned off. And this is actually a philosophy. I remember this guy in Los Angeles who taught dating secrets. Get a girl's number but never call her right away. Wait a month. And
don't wait a month.
But this was,
don't wait,
because if you call,
weeks,
the funny thing is Crystal calls me right away and she wants a date tomorrow. And I was like, perfect. And I was on this raw food diet, so I made her zucchini spaghetti with a raw cashew cream sauce and basil and oregano and diced up tomatoes and avocado, and so we had dinner and a glass of wine, and then we had our first kiss. And in this first kiss, she touched the top of my head, which is the crown chakra, with her fingernails, and it was literally like this rush of tingles exploded in ecstasy in my brain. And it was a very physical ecstasy on a real physical level. And she just kind of, ran her fingernails into the top of my head, and probably only 5 women in my life have ever done that to me. And where through the kiss, there's this tremendous bliss. And then there's other instances where there's kissing and it's really purely physically erotic and sensual, but it doesn't go to that level that I call magic, right? And there are many people who get together and they kiss and they feel nothing, and they'll even get married and have kids. And because I've talked to men like this, I've talked to women like this who have just thought, well, that's all there is. I mean, a bit of smooching, a bit of, moisture.
I guess you don't know what you don't know, right?
You don't, exactly. You don't know what you don't know. And that's kind of why I'm showing almost like these different dimensions of the kiss, because there's so much potential, even spiritually, just at the kissing stage. I mean, I remember this one time, it was in Beverly Hills, actually. This woman came over, and I was just renting a room in a house there, and all we did is kiss, and I was completely paralyzed the whole time. I didn't want to go all the way, didn't want to do anything else, because of how it felt. And the other thing that happens is because we're electrical beings, and when we go into romantic kiss, there's the sexual energy starts to arouse and we get turned on. And there's a tendency to try to go there so fast. And you notice if we climax too soon in an orgasm, all the electricity then subsides. And in fact, in rabbits, after they have sex, they will pass out and look like they're dead and lie there with their tongue hanging out of their mouth. And you swear to God, that's a dead rabbit. And then they have to recover their energy before they can walk around and maybe even do it again. And I know people that have worked with rabbits who have told me this story, and I think it's kind of hilarious because they basically fuck like rabbits, right? Which is funny. But do animals do the same thing? Well, they tend to sniff each other, so there's something happening with the nose, and sometimes their tongues get involved. The tongue is very electrical. In fact, if I had my voltmeter here, and if I measure voltage off the tongue, it's much stronger than off the fingernails, off the fingers. So the tongue is an electrical organ in that when it intermingles with your partner's tongue, you're transferring electricity. And if your awareness goes past the physical saliva slimy part to the electricity part, you start to feel arousal energy swirling in all of your energy centers. In your belly, you might get nervousness and tingles, and you start to feel it in your heart and your throat. And if you're really open, you'll start to feel it in the crown area. And it's really an art. The art of going from pure physical sensation, which is really a lot of burning and a lot of moisture, and there's definitely electricity, but that electricity might only appear in the first chakra, in the sexual organs. That you don't necessarily feel that electricity spread through the body, right? And even the hands touching each other really nicely will transfer this electricity. So this is a person who's ascended from pure physical sensations to seeing their electricity body, and that electricity starts to get more and more and more purified with awareness. And this is actually like a needle in a haystack in the Dalai Lama's translation of Kalachakra Tantra, which I read the entire thing. And in the sexual act of Tantra, the goal is for the man and woman embrace to hear. The woman will hear the male sound and the female will hear the male sound, the sound current, which means the electricity gets so pure in awareness in total sexual union that you can actually hear the inner sound of the opposite sex. And now it wouldn't really work for same sex, because the theory is in the Kundalini is only the opposite has the opposite energy that causes the spiral of the Kundalini to spin up the spine. Now, I don't know the answer to that question for people who may be bi or something like that, because I've never experienced anything like that, and I don't want to, because I'm a heterosexual. So I'm just saying that you get to the point that you can hear the other's sound current, and then your sound current mixes with theirs. This is in the Kalachakra Tantra, and it spins up, and you can reach the enlightened state according to these teachings in Tantra much faster than any other meditation technique. But again, it starts with touching, getting to the level you can perceive each other as electrical vibrations, and then you start to perceive frequency. And the frequency gets higher and higher and more purified, to the point that your awareness actually merges with their sound current. And if you really think about it, like, the sound current is contained in their voice. It's contained, like, even when they come into the room, you can feel their vibration, even if they haven't said anything, right? Like, you as a woman can feel when a man comes into a room that you love, he has a vibration. And that's what I'm talking about, is locking in and merging very sweetly and softly into that in the embrace. Can, with awareness techniques, and I found this throughout the, the 18 years that I was with my wife, that you literally become more and more and more pure at the kiss, and the electricity transfers. In fact, when we were creating our children, our second daughter, I had these visions of these white clouds with lights in them that were so bright and spinning around. And there was the dark cloud that tried to encounter the light cloud, and the light cloud and the dark cloud were, and all of this was in my third eye, fully psychedelic visual, while we were making love to conceive our second daughter. So that's the second, you could say, the second reason for the kiss. It leads to the conception of wife. Now, here's what's really interesting. I'm going to go to the Gospel according to Philip, and I'm going to show people this on the screen. So I go to Zoom. Can I do share screen?
Oh, sure. Do I need to activate it?
Yeah, you got to activate me as a co-host.
How do I do that? I can't remember.
It says,
let me pause and we'll work on it. No, okay. All right, I did.
No, it's okay. It's okay. You just got to go to participants, and then you click on more on me.
Hang on, I remember. Okay. Because it's up here, I think. Those 3 dots.
Oh. Right.
Okay, hang on. Make host. I make you host. I think it comes out as co-host, but that's fine.
Yeah. Right. So there we go. So now Microsoft Word, the Gospel according to there. So this is the Gospel according to Philip. And of course, this was banned by the church, because in this gospel, not only does Jesus kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth, but he actually is going to talk about how this is how the perfect ones conceive life, conceive a life. And so all you do is I put this Gospel of Philip, which is really a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest masterpieces in Christianity. And this is what Dan Brown relied on, but he missed the most important part, because he only found the part, and I'll show you this. All you do in Word is you go to your search tool, and I type in the word kiss. Okay, so, and it will go to this paragraph. The heavenly man has many more sons than the earthly man. If the sons of Adam are many, although they die, how much more the sons of the perfect man? They who do not die, but are always begotten. The Father makes a son, and the Son has not the power to make a son, which should be a question mark, because he's beckoning him. For he who has been begotten, has not the power to beget, but the Son gets brothers for himself, not sons. There should be a question mark here in the scripture. All who are begotten in the world are begotten in the natural way, meaning having sex, and the others are nourished from the place whence they have been born. It is from being promised to the heavenly place that man receives nourishment. And then there's a missing word in the text. Him from the mouth would mean a kiss. And had the word gone out from that place, word actually in Greek means logos, which means perfect harmonic vibration. So had the perfect vibration gone out from that place, meaning the mouth, it would be nourished from the mouth, and it would become perfect. For it is by a kiss that the perfect conceive and give birth. For this reason, we also kiss one another, meaning the early Christians, and actually even Muslims do this. We receive conceptions from the grace which is in one another, meaning the grace one another merges. And this is where it says there were 3 who always walked with the Lord: Mary, his mother, and her sister, and Magdalene, the one who was called his companion. And the word companion is noted in the scriptures, even in the canonized Bible, where there's descriptions of some of his disciples and apostles, their wives were called companion. They never used the word wife. It was always companion. And it says his sister and his mother and his companion were each a Mary. And that's actually referring to Jesus's sister, because he had, according to Mark 6, 1-8, he had sisters. And what we know in the canonized Bible is what we call the Virgin Mary was conceived in her womb, a child who would become Jesus Christ without sex. But the moment he's born, the Bible tells us that Joseph consummated their relationship and they had children the normal way. So in Mark 6, 1-8, it says he had brothers and sisters. So that means there was a whole family. And many of his family members were actually his disciples. So in this piece, in the Gospel of Philip, we're seeing the beginning of, one, the reason they kiss, and two, whom he's about to kiss, and that Jesus has the power to conceive life in the womb by a kiss. So he's kissing her, which with this was the part Dan Brown missed. He's able to conceive life in her womb without sexual intercourse, is Jesus himself, which is different than his parents. So then when we hit the cursor again, we come to kiss, and I hit it again. So see, here we go again. And this is really incredible, because I'll start a little higher up. The Lord went into the dye works of Levi, which is one of the Jewish tribes. He took 72 colors and threw them into a vat, and he took them all out white. And he said, even so, the Son of Man has come as a dyer. And later in the Gospel of Philip, it actually describes that God is in the colors of the rainbow, which is really a psychedelic kind of an experience. And following this, it says, as for the wisdom who is called the barren, she is the mother of the angels. And that would be, and the companion of the Lord, Mary Magdalene, Jesus loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on the mouth. The rest of the disciples were jealous, and they said to him, why do you love her more than all of us? The Savior answered and said to them, why do I not love you like her? Which is kind of a stupid thing, right? He's like because early Christians would greet each other with a kiss, but not on the mouth. They would greet each other with a kiss on the cheek. He's kissing her on the mouth. And we can see the mouth is where the transfer of spirit occurs. And we can see that to conceive life, they have to kiss on the mouth. Jesus being perfect would conceive it. So this is how he's giving birth to their children. And this is where, of course, the reason when the early church was forming and they wanted to get rid of women, and they had to get rid of a lot of women. Like there's a lot of Gnostic literature, and what we can see very clearly is the first councils at Nicaea and Hippo in North Africa, and the second council at Nicaea, and a council at Trento in Italy. They decided to remove all accounts that show women having any importance. And that's because in the Roman Empire, the chief god was Jupiter, whom in the Greek is Zeus, one and the same, was an all-male god. And they were not going to have women be divine in this new religion that was conquering the entire empire. And this is a huge story, because all of the women, including Jesus's sister, who's present here, and how the title virgin is given to women who have clearly had sex does not make sense to the church's modern description of virgin. Virgin just means pure. It's a state of consciousness. It has nothing to do with whether a person had sexual relations or not. So the church had to bury all the evidence of Jesus kissing Mary Magdalene on the mouth and giving her children, and they had to bury all the evidence of his mother having children the regular way. But it's right there in the canonized scripture. It's so clear. It's so clear. And in Mark 6:1-8, which is canonized, Jesus has brothers and sisters, which were born the regular way. And Joseph would have been, I mean, Mary would have been somewhere around the age of 12 or 13 when she gave birth to Jesus. And then she would have consummated her first relationship with Joseph, who would have been at least 30 years old, from what we know about how old men lived and how long men lived in those ages. So he was much older than her, but he was appointed to her. So this is where we see that this is the great Gospel of Philip that led to Dan Brown's entire, series. And the whole manuscript is really quite remarkable. But also what's very important is that when a disciple is ready, a master can transfer the total illumination to a disciple by a kiss. And there's a great example of this. A mystic, his name was Meher Baba, got enlightened by a kiss from his master. And I'm just going to see if I can find this.
Is there anything to do with, like when you're kissing, you're in the present moment? And so, that's the point of potential enlightenment, isn't it? The present moment.
Well, see, we all have it, right? We all have it. If we all, instead of we're in a real hurry to end the sex act, which is you're not even purifying the electricity in the nervous system. There's no heartfelt awareness. There's no love. It's really quite, I mean, it's not even fair to say it's quite animalistic, really. I mean, if I watched, my dog before he got neutered, running around the neighborhood, trying to attack females, it would be, I would say pornography is very likened to that. It's just to complete the act as fast as possible and not enjoy anything.
Being a precursor, like, I imagine a lot of people, I've got to give her a kiss and then I've got to touch her here and got to touch her here. So then I can get to the actual act where I want to get.
And nowadays they don't even want to do that because they see that as a waste of time. So they haven't been educated by their parents or anybody on we are electrical beings. Even holding a hand can be spectacular. A walk in the park. I mean, I remember I had this date in LA and this really beautiful girl I met at a party. Her name was Carol, came over to my apartment in Marina Del Rey. And she said to me, do you want to just stay here or do you want to go for a walk? And I said, I thought about it and I said, I know what she wants to do. She wants to have sex right now, but I don't even know her yet. So we went for a walk and we held hands and we laughed all day. I'll remember that day the rest of my life. And, I never wanted another date with her because probably in her mind, I turned her down to have sex right away. But actually, we had so much fun and there was so much laughter, and holding her hand made me so high. I just wanted to warm up to this person as romantically first. I didn't want to do what probably a lot of other boys did for her, which is to go there right away. I was quite young at the time, in my 20s. So you're right. If we meditated more and did actual practices, and even like water, like bathing in water, and really taking our time, we would enjoy it much more. But it eventually gets to the point of the master level. And the story of Meher Baba is really remarkable because Meher Baba is a very famous enlightened master teacher, but he has to be ripe and ready. His kiss comes from a very old woman, by the way. Her name was Baba Jean Osho. Osho, is also a name attributed to a very famous male teacher. And Baba Jean sees the Meher Baba as a student, and she comes up to him, and she knows her life is about to end. She's at the end. And when a master sees students who are really ripe, they know which one is really just needs a little push. So she kisses him, He goes into a coma for a whole year. It's a very long time. I mean, she knocked him out. So when I think of the kisses I got as a young boy and how it paralyzed me, he was knocked out cold by her kiss, completely knocked out. And he wakes up a fully realized enlightened master in the supreme state of divine bliss and ecstasy and love and peace, astounding peace. And it doesn't ever end. He teaches a path to enlightenment. But his story is so remarkable. She's actually a Muslim. She was a Muslim spiritual master, female master. She was, again, not very well noted, right? We know the Prophet of Islam had one wife in the beginning, Khadijah, who was much older than him. And she was really like a businesswoman. She really organized him and his message and teachings for the world. And later, when she died, Muhammad took a number of wives for himself. And also you can see King Solomon allegedly had 700 wives, but I don't believe he had sex or produced children with almost all of them. He merely married them because he loved them and he took care of them. So you see examples also of Krishna with his 5,000 gopis, and he would transfer, he didn't have sex with the 5,000 gopis. He would transfer his enlightened consciousness to his 5,000 girls, because they were young girls, through an energy transmission like a kiss. So there's a point where the erotic part of love no longer matters to the master, because the master knows that the ecstasy they feel, and I experience this in meditation every day, the supreme ecstasy that surpasses all sexual pleasure, absolutely does. And that doesn't mean that sexual pleasure is not beautiful. It just means that this supreme bliss surpasses it. And so basically, when a teacher gets to that level, they can transfer the energy of the spiritual enlightenment to a student by a kiss. And that is another interpretation of the Gospel of Philip, of why Jesus is kissing Mary Magdalene on the lips, not on the cheeks. But then the disciple says, why do you love her more than the rest of us? Are they saying they want to get kissed on the lips? No, that's not what they're saying. They're saying they can see he loves her the way he kisses her, like beyond a traditional greeting kiss on the cheek. And it's really in secret in the Gospel of Philip that the reason the children of Jesus were hidden, had to be hidden, is because Jesus could see the future. He knew every one of his apostles were going to be killed by either crucifixion or some form of torture, which they were, except for only a few of the males, John being one of them. And even his brother James was killed by brutal means. He was thrown off the top of the temple and stoned to death, the Solomon's temple. And the women were spared by miraculous powers when these disciples of Jesus were trying to be rounded up and killed. Now, here's what's interesting. If Mary Magdalene was a prostitute and she was just somebody who got saved, let's just leave it at that, then why does the Roman historical record show that the armies went to her village in Migdal, up by the Sea of Galilee, and her family owned all the fishing boats, and they were very wealthy, actually. And the Roman soldiers turned the entire Sea of Galilee to blood. They killed every single person in her village looking for her. Think about it. Why would they, after Jesus was crucified, be going after her for any reason at all, if she's not the most important woman in the entire Christian movement? Because there's no other example, and I've read the Roman historical record, there's no other example of the armies going after an entire community to get one person, and they never got her. because Mary Magdalene travels by boat with one of their daughters and the children to an area of Gaul that became France. They land in Marseille, and that is where she establishes the new teaching and the new order. And the armies were still pursuing her and tried to find her, and she would levitate up into a cloud every single time and hide from the armies. I actually had an incredible blinding vision of Mary Magdalene on May 23rd. I think it was in 2016. I have a recording of that. And that is the day every year, May 23rd, for a whole week in France, they celebrate the arrival of Mary Magdalene and their children to France. To this day, it's called Saint Maxime le Saint Baume. So we have the ultimate kiss, right? And if the ultimate kiss is to create perfect ones, the perfect ones can conceive life. There's many ways to interpret it, but it really looks like all the evidence points to the fact that he gave her children by a kiss, and they had many children, and those children became what are known as the Merovingian bloodline and the Merovingian kings of France, who were systematically, because they were the bloodline of Christ, systematically hunted down and killed by the Catholic Church and the Catholic armies. So because they wanted to stop and do everything they could to stop the evidence of Jesus having had a wife and a family. They wanted him to be Zeus. The Romans wanted Jesus to be Zeus. They didn't want to get rid of Zeus. And so they reduced this incredible religion that really had a romantic unification of the male and female path to enlightenment. They wanted to eradicate that. Now, this is another example. And this is a great example because it involves St. Francis, and I've studied St. Francis's life. That St. Francis was in love with Sister Clare. He was so in love with her, but he didn't have access to the Gnostic Gospels in his time. And all of his disciples knew it, that he was in love with her. And Sister Clare pleaded with his disciple monks, you would call them, to just have lunch with her. It took him a long time to give in, but he loved her so much. This is the greatest miracle in Francis's entire life, which is a romantic miracle. So Francis and Clare set up a blanket on the top of the mountain in Italy, and you can still go up to the top of that mountain today and visit, because there's a church that was erected up there for this great miracle.
Whereabouts in Italy, you said?
The mountain in Italy, St. Francis's mountain.
Only because I lived in the Italian Alps for over a decade, so obviously that's like, oh, where's that?
Well, where do you see what happened? It's the mountain, I think it's called La Verna.
Okay.
Mount Penna.
Okay.
La Verna is a locality on Mount Penna, an isolated mountain of St. Francis in the spring. Okay, so here's what happens, which again is the greatest miracle in Francis's story. They make lunch and they have a picnic basket and a blanket, and they set it out, and they sit there. They gaze into each other's eyes. It almost brings me to tears every time I tell the story. They did not touch their food ever. They sat gazing perpetually into each other's eyes, holding hands. And by nightfall, the entire mountain filled with light. And all the villagers were saying, what is this great light in the top of the mountain? And they climbed up the mountain in those days to come to St. Francis, sitting, it's hard for me to even speak, sitting, gazing in Claire's eyes with this aura of light that was fully luminous for all the villagers to see. And they never, ever touch their food. They weren't allowed, under the strict orders that were created for celibacy, to touch one another. But their love, their desire for union, and the ecstatic electricity that was, it fused in the ultimate tantric union, and they both were in this state of divine illumination together, romantic. And also Dante, the famous Italian poet, I mean, he's such a romantic, because Dante is banished from Florence, his hometown in Italy, for reporting what he saw in his visions. But as a very young man, Dante sees this young woman. She's only 13. Her name is Beatrice. And Beatrice looks at Dante, and he just is so in love with what he sees. Again, such purity of the soul and the heart that we don't teach our kids, and we don't see today. And he collapses in this vision. And in this vision, when he's home, he sees Jesus picking him up like a dead man and holding him. And Jesus tells him, she is your beloved. So Jesus again is authorizing that Dante, who is this spiritual master, is going to marry Beatrice. And what happens is he comes out of the vision, and he can't get Beatrice to notice him. She doesn't even notice he's alive. Like, he'll look at her across the room, and some other woman will catch his gaze, and he's like, no, I'm not looking at you, I'm looking at Beatrice behind you, right? Well, Beatrice ends up dying of the influenza, and Dante goes crazy. He thinks that Jesus was insane. How could you be wrong? You're God. Well, what ends up happening is Dante has to marry somebody else and has a bunch of kids, and then he starts having these spiritual visions. And the poet Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid, guides him as his spiritual guide through the 9 levels of hell, where he sees many popes in hell and many bishops in hell, which is why he was banished from Florence. And then Virgil takes him through the 9 levels of purgatory, which is purification, purgation, to purge one's sins. And then finally, when Virgil takes him to the gate of the first heaven, Beatrice comes with Christ in this shining light and takes him by the hand and guides him through the 9 levels of heaven. Again, an incredible, ecstatic, romantic vision that has been removed completely in the Christian religion, in the Catholic Church, to show we want Zeus to be our God. We're not going to have a woman. We're not going to allow women to be God. So they turned the Virgin Mary into a perpetual virgin, which is very clear in the canonized scripture is not true. That is just absolutely not true. She was not a perpetual virgin the way we express it. It's right in your scripture. So, but they still believe that today. And she was a family woman, says in Mark 6:1-8. And then some people try to say, well, those were Joseph's children from another marriage. Well, then why are they so young and even younger than Jesus? Because James was younger than Jesus, and he's his brother. What do you mean? They have to talk their way out of it, right? And that destroyed the pathway to God of romanticism. It completely destroyed it. It made the nuns live separate from the males, and then the female nuns would get raped. They would also sexually abuse each other. They would have children. They would bury their fetuses, so they would still look like nuns. All those crimes of the buried fetuses found in the monasteries and the way the nuns abused the young children from their sexual frustration, all of it because Rome couldn't stand it that they didn't have Zeus anymore. So they turned Jesus into Zeus. And they ruined the romantic, beautiful path to God. And I believe it was in those forced celibacy monasteries of the boys and the girls that the birth of bisexuality came about. It came about through sexual oppression and isolating the sexes. So they eventually lost touch with connecting physically with the opposite sex. And that's why today we have this, in my opinion, disease of pornography that is not erotic love, that is, I mean, I'm not against erotic love. I'm not against the nudity, right? Adam and Eve were naked in paradise in the Garden of Eden, naked. God was liberated. You can tell them to put their clothes on. He said, if you ever take in the knowledge of good and evil, you'll die. Well, good and evil is judgment. God didn't want us to judge. God wanted us to be pure and innocent and live nude in paradise with perfect bodies that didn't have disease and death. But the moment they took in the knowledge of good and evil, which is symbolic of the coiled serpent, right? Which is you going from singularity into duality. And if I judge differently than another person, we're going to have an argument, and eventually whole countries and judge each other, and then you have wars, right? So Cain and Abel have the first biblical fight, and they almost kill each other. One of them lives because they now have the knowledge that divides, the dividing knowledge that takes us away from union and love and into ego. And that is essentially what Zeus is. Zeus is an egotistical god. He's a jealous god. He's an angry god. And that's what we did. We turned against the god of love, and which really was the Garden of Eden, where the mythic story, it's a mythic story, it's a parabolic story, but it's true in every single one of us, right? We separate boys from girls. We tell them you can't see each other and touch each other and play with each other past a certain age. And because they're isolated and removed from each other, even in the school system, they don't know how to feel comfortable with each other. And then the monasteries, which is the forced celibacy, led to total isolation and a myopic mind, that the boys would only see boys and the girls would only see girls. And it's where it all fell apart.
But this is fascinating, David. Like we've touched on the kiss of love and the kiss of life, as in creating life. The kiss of death, where does that come into it?
Well, we started with that, but the kiss of death, it's actually mythically when Jesus kisses, so when Judas kisses Jesus on the cheek, I believe it was, he's showing the Roman armies who are coming at the order of the Jewish desire to execute Jesus, who Jesus is, so they can identify him. And that's one of the earliest identities of the kiss of death and where it comes from. And then, of course, the Italian mafia adopts the kiss of death, right? That if somebody's going to be kissed, they're to be killed. And I was Googling this actually. And then the early Romans also used the kiss of death. And it's a certain type of kiss. It's not a beautiful kiss. It's a kiss that identifies that somebody's about to be killed or even die naturally, right? So again, it's the passing of the breath, right? So when a person is about to die, and if it's a natural death, they can kiss somebody and transfer something of their spiritual attainment to another person through a kiss. And that might even be a family member. I mean, I remember my grandma on my dad's side, Olga Sereda, lived to be 103. And when we saw her, my wife and I, with Alira, our first daughter, and Astaria wasn't born yet, just before she died, she was blind. And she kissed me so deeply, actually, on the lips. And she kissed my little Alira, and she kissed my wife. And I think she died within a year and a half of that date. But she was blind. So being blind and kissing her family was, I mean, I'll never forget it. I mean, her lips and her arms shaking, and she couldn't even see me. And so I could say that I experienced the kiss of death from my own grandma.
So
But the mafia used it in a murderous sense, and what Judas does, I mean, in the Gospel of Judas, the whole story of Judas is completely different. He's actually appointed by Jesus to turn him in. He doesn't do it for 30 pieces of silver. And he's actually, in the Gospel of Judas, one of the highest disciples of Christ, because all the disciples gather around, and Jesus tells them, not one of you dare look at me, only Judas. And when Jesus transfigures, he's shining like the sun. He's so bright you can't look at him physically. And there's many accounts of him doing these transfigurations in the Gnostic Gospels, but also in the canonized literature. But in this particular instance, in a transfiguration in Judas, only Judas can look at him. And that's in this radiant form. The others have to lower their gaze in humility because he's too bright to look at, not just physically, but spiritually bright. So Judas is given the dirty deed of turning him in, and in later distortions of what really happened, he becomes an enemy of Christ. And so that's the way common Christianity sees him. But when the Gospel of Judas was found, Jesus, when he looks at Judas in the eyes, he shows Judas the heavens. They open up above him, and he shows him heavens that are so high that no human will ever go there. And it's interesting because the Buddha does the same thing. He has this ability with his disciples. When they reach a certain level of enlightenment, he can visually show them all the different realms of the heavens where the gods and the goddesses live, and the different levels of the enlightened realms. And they actually seeing it like a giant movie. So something very similar happens in the Gospel of Judas. So he does deliver the kiss of death, but in the Gospel of Judas, Jesus appoints him that role. And the other disciples don't seem to know it. So it's quite possible that the other disciple accounts spread around, making Judas look out to be this bad person who's going to take this huge hit. But actually, he's the most evolved in the Gospel of Judas. So all of these manuscripts have kind of emerged. I've studied all world religions very deeply. I mean, I've read the Quran, I've read the Bhagavad Gita. I've studied hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts, and gotten my hands on very rare manuscripts. And you can see the romantic pairedness goes all the way back. I mean, the Buddha was married to Yasodhara. They had a son. But when Buddha was young, he was a prince in the palace, and he slept with a lot of different girls because they were girls at that age. And he could have anybody he wanted, but he wanted Yasodhara. But then, being married and having a son, Rahula, he goes on his quest to attain the ultimate, right? And when he returns as a fully realized master, it's almost identical to the scene of Mary Magdalene crying and wiping Jesus's feet with her hair covered in tears. Yasodhara cries her eyes out and wipes the Buddha's feet with her tears, because she can see this is, she was in union with the Buddha when he was a young man. They're intimately merged, and she wipes his feet with her tears and said, "Did you really have to leave me and your son to attain this?" He couldn't answer her because he knew the path of extremes, going into the forest and fasting himself down to a skeleton, was not the way to attain enlightenment. There's no way to attain enlightenment doing extreme things. And the Buddha finds the middle way, which is the path of non-extremes. And then he becomes enlightened when he starts eating food again and he does things in moderation. And then later, the Buddha's wife and his son attain full nirvana, which is a 7th level master, 7 levels of the light illumination. And then he finally adopts women into a monastic kind of order. But the men and the women have to be at the age of 50, because he wants them to have worked out their sexual fantasies and desires when they're younger, and have had their families, had their children, and then be ready to really pursue this meditation very, very focused to attain the ultimate state of consciousness. And the Buddha produces over 500 fully realized masters, which we don't have an account of that in Christianity. We don't have any evidence that more than 7 women and 12 men attained in what you would call real illumination. But the Buddha had over 500. So, I mean, I know there are Christians out there that will say, only Jesus is the only way, even though that's only confirmed by one apostle, those exact words. It's not confirmed by any other apostle. There's no other apostle that confirms that Jesus is the only way to God, except for, I believe, John. So from the Greek, that's a very extreme translation. It should be backed up by all of them if they all believed it. But obviously the word only is not there in the other accounts. So I'm saying the kiss starts in this crude form, right? It's crude. It's lust. And it slowly gets more and more and more pure. And eventually it gets so pure, it can transfer spiritual enlightenment. That's just incredible.
This is great. So let's bring it back to the present moment of today. So people that are watching that maybe, haven't found this depth with kissing, like, what advice, what steps, how do they become connected to this beautiful divine power that comes within the levels of kissing?
Well, I think kiss and the breath are so deeply connected. So breath awareness and just feeling, like if you feel your lips right now, just become aware of them, the sensation, the temperature, the moisture, and then when there's an attraction, they start tingling. They literally start tingling. And there's something about the mouth. Like, of course, if I'm looking at a person on the street and they're talking, I don't have the desire to kiss them. But if the energy is just right and you start staring at the lips, this energy is already, the merging is already begun. It's just like Saint Francis and Saint Clare looking into each other's eyes and then touching each other's hands. The lips are next, but they're going to refrain because of what they were taught. And I know they wanted to kiss each other ravishingly. I know they did. But because when Francis was a young man, he partied and drank, had girls. He did all those things. But when he went on the path, which, the Catholic way is an extreme path. It's a torturous path. What Francis did to himself, he only slept with the brown scapular robe. He used a wooden block for a pillow. He slept in a cave, and he didn't have sex anymore. And he went blind and got very sick, and he died in his early 40s. And he basically tortured himself. And St. John on the Cross, the same. These men died in their 40s. So they were torturing their natural desires as a way to identify enlightenment. But there are no teachings from Jesus's words that suggest that anybody should do anything like that. We can't see it in the Gnostic literature, and we can't see it anywhere. There's no evidence that Jesus told his disciples to throw away your wives. They're no good. I'm an all-male God, follow me. It does not say that anywhere. In fact, there's not a lot that we know even from the Gnostic literature about their wives, but we do know some. They called their wives companions. But there's not a lot of talk about it, right? And same with this, because Jesus had 72 disciples, 12 apostles, and 7 females that were close to him all the time. So where do these extreme ideas come from, right? So today it starts with, I think we need to come back to the romantic energy and the kiss and holding hands don't be in a hurry, because you have forever to come to this moment that you think you want. And the pornography is giving people an idea that we're just animals, that we don't have emotional feelings, that we don't have heart palpitations when we look into each other's eyes. It doesn't even show that. I'm really sad for, like, what is the future? Like, we went from, I mean, my parents were part of the 60s revolution. We moved from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada in about 1964 to Berkeley, California. And my parents were married with 4 boys, and the free love movement came along and they got involved in it. And I remember my parents throwing us in the back of the station wagon, taking us to these parties, and we would come home and we didn't know what was going on, but it destroyed their marriage. It destroyed their marriage, and that destroyed the family. And that temptation is there, but it's also part of, I think, the interpretation of Christianity, which was so strict and severe in the churches, didn't really educate people on romance and love, because Jesus was apparently not in love with anybody but God. And the rebellion that led to Playboy magazine and eventually Penthouse magazine and all those things was in a way was part of the human desire to come back to the Garden of Eden, to be naked in paradise, and to have physical love, and to understand what an orgasm is, instead of a missionary position just to have children. Again, nowhere in Jesus's words are there any instructions, except for one, which is, this is kind of funny to me, and this one statement that is not confirmed by any of the other apostles, is, if thy right hand offends thee, cut it off, for it's better to cut it off than to face hellfire and damnation. Well, what he's talking about is the priest should not masturbate and then use the same hand to administer the sacraments to the people in church, right? You'd have to use your other hand. That's why he said, if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. He's talking to the apostles, who are all old enough now that they've had their families and their children, and the sexual desire diminishes with age. And don't do that. So that statement led to parents telling their kids, if they masturbate, they're going to go to hell. I remember this growing up in the 60s. I remember it. Now, my parents didn't tell me that because they didn't believe that. But many of my friends who went to Catholic schools, they were told that if you masturbate, you'll go to hell, right? So the God of the Bible has Adam and Eve naked in the Garden of Eden, and saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth with children. Go have sex and make babies. So how does that God end up becoming this uptight God that's against human lovemaking and making babies? I don't know how it happened. It happened.
And also throw things like shame and guilt into the mix that the church like to dwell on, and you start to join the dots and get the picture, right? Because shame and guilt are right at the other end of the vibrational frequency spectrum than love and joy and bliss. So,
and see, you're right. And if you have shame and guilt for being attracted to the opposite sex, they actually, I've read this in this is in the articles of the Knights Templar. For the Knights Templar, because it's physically impossible for a male to hold seed indefinitely, they would allow themselves homosexual sex, and they were still had not lain with a woman, which is what it says. Jesus never said that. It's in the book of Revelation, by the way. We don't have any evidence that Jesus said that the pure ones will have never laid with a woman, means they can lay with each other, giving birth to homosexuality in the Catholic, the Knights Templar order. And there's another order in addition to the Templars So they were technically celibate because they weren't laying with a woman. You see how, and because of the shame and the guilt from two statements that I just mentioned. And so that killed the family. It made the woman seem like she had a purpose only to bear children and not have any pleasure, any joy in the romantic at all. But yet, by removing the Gospel of Philip, okay, how do you imagine a courtroom, and I've got 12 witnesses and 7 male witnesses and 7 females to tell the story. But sorry, I don't like what 2/3 of you have to say, so you can't appear in court today. We're only going to hear Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the book of Acts. The other apostles get to say a few words, but their full accounts exist, but we'll burn it and throw it away and hope it never resurfaces, because it shows Jesus had a wife and children, and his mother had children the regular way. And we don't want people to see that, because our God is Zeus. That's how I see it. And yes, today, because generations for thousands, 2,000 years lived with this guilt and shame for romantic love. You see, in the early beginning of the pre-Christian movement and the Christian movement, and in the early Jewish religion was not a solid religion. In fact, it was never a solid religion. It's not a solid religion today because there's too many disagreements. And in fact, Jesus had to warn, this is in John 8, chapter 8, verse 44, very specifically. He's telling a group of Jews, you're worshiping the wrong God. He's a jealous God and an angry God, and he's a murderer and a liar since the beginning. Don't worship him. So what this said is the Jewish religion, there are many examples, like the prophet Elijah has a duel with Jezebel and her husband for worshiping the Baal god. They were worshiping different gods. There was no solid, unified Jewish religion. So you don't have a clear picture of what marriage looked like until you study it. And what we can see is couples would fall in love, they were together, and then they had a wedding. Not having a wedding first and then seeing if they might get along, being appointed by family members, you see? So what Catholic parents used to tell their kids, even in the 1960s, I remember my mom telling me this, is you can't have sex until you're married. Well, that's not how it was. You had to be in love first. The marriage already occurred. The wedding was the celebration of the fact that two people fell in love. It was a celebration after the fact. And in a way, it can be that way today, because people have liberated themselves from that strict ritual. You can't have sex until you're married. But what it really means is you can't have sex until you fall in love with somebody and become as one, right? In union, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden again. But again, we don't know, like, what the repression did is so severe also, in that these priests, their bodies are producing seed, sperm, and they're told to be celibate, and they're abusing our children. And now the story of the Vatican Girl on Netflix just blew my freaking mind. I don't know if you've seen Vatican Girl. It is astounding. Involves the rape of a female child who grew up in Vatican City in a very, very important family, and she's used in ritual sex that goes all the way up to high bishops in the church and even to popes. And she was murdered, sacrificed, child sacrifice, all the way up to the top. It's all exposed in the Netflix series, The Vatican Girl. And yet Catholics have nothing to say. Now, I believe there are illuminated persons and people, and God is in the Vatican, but Satan is also in the Vatican. And Satan has always been right on top of wherever God is, right? God, Jesus crucified, nailed to a cross, he was right there, right? It's an intimate relationship. The dark and the light are right together. And you can't be you can't be dissuaded from a religion because we see corruption, right? Now, the story of the First Nations kids, the Native Indian kids in Canada, their physical remains have been dug up in all these churches where they were tortured. And I actually interviewed on camera many survivors of the residential school, so I know that story intimately. But the same thing happened to the Boy Scouts. The same thing happens in our regular schools. The same thing happens with police officers. We're seeing more and more and more abuse of children. And again, it all comes from this sexual repression and a lack of the the connection that we lost. And our bodies are producing this adrenaline desire all the time, and it's turned into pornography is ruling the world. It's literally one of the number one searches on the internet today. Statistically, it's one of the highest. I mean, there was a study done on where do people go online. Where's the majority of it? The majority of it is money and porn. That's our world. That's what we become.
All
So
right.
how do we get back to that kiss?
We're heading in a different direction, right? So to wrap up, David, we can go over, but we've got say 10, 15 minutes left. Let's take it to where we want to go with the kiss and conscious love and energetics. And so, in a ideal world, what do you see happening? What's coming in our future when, we let go of porn and we heal ourselves and we enjoy the beauty of the presence of the kiss, and we're not goal orientated in sex? It's like, what's coming? What's ahead of us?
Well, I think it's going to take a new education that needs a lot of money behind it to educate people on what we're talking about, because it is a great loss to lose the kiss. And there needs to be a lot of healing from fear and guilt and shame. And I think it's going to take a lot to bring us back to that. People need to tell stories. I think just telling stories about what was your first kiss like and describing it. I think the internet needs to hear those stories. And like you've been posting recently, just to see a picture of a man and a woman kissing and even holding. When you post these, I'm like, that doesn't exist anywhere on the internet. It's only Emma who's doing this.
My page.
Yeah, and it's like, and I look at how many likes it gets, and I go, why isn't this getting, like, why is somebody's dog and cat video getting 2 million views, 30 million views for dog and cat videos that are cute?
Say, for anyone who doesn't follow me on Facebook, they are accompanied by my writing. I'm not just posting.
Oh yeah, they're beautiful writing.
And often it takes me longer to find the right picture with the frequency that I want than it takes me to write the actual piece of prose or poetry that I'm accompanying it with, because it has to be, for me, perfectly aligned. And so yeah, I just wanted to put that.
I said, find this picture. I love how you find these pictures. Everybody's seen this. It's no. Let me just see if I can. Here it is. I found it, just like that. Very, very amazing that I found this picture. I want to show this picture on the screen. So
I got quite a few bits of writing on kissing as well. Poetry, prose.
See, when I studied black and white photography, this famous photo by Robert Doisneau in Paris, right? This photo was so famous. It's an old black and white photo taken in Paris or somewhere in Europe. And when I was studying black and white photography, like, this photograph is incredible. When do we see this anymore on the street? When?
Yep.
This is what we're talking about tonight. This is what we lost. And do the people walking by look shocked and flabbergasted? No. That's because they see it all the time. And that, the ecstasy of the kiss, I think, is what would entice people today to come back to it. It's there is more ecstasy in the kissing and the holding and the touching, and eventually even in full nude embrace. The final act is all over. Even though it's an ecstatic explosion, all the electricity withdraws, just like the rabbits I talked about, and you can't feel anymore. You can touch each other. I mean, there's warmth there. There's still some resonance. If you meditate before and after, which I used to do with my wife, I found sex is way better if you meditate for at least 20 minutes before even the first kiss, because you're tuning your nervous system. You're getting it ready. Don't be in such a hurry. Have a nice bath and some nice scented oils and make it a beautiful experience. And the other thing you're seeing a phenomenon of, which is, I'm trying to remember the name of this company, and now celebrities are doing this. It's a website where people pay and they get access to that star's webcam, and they do things in the nude, and so when you turn sex into a commodity like that, and it's really sad because again it's sweeping the internet as much as porn. You don't see, like, what if you don't see people in love, you just see this kind of whatever. I mean, I haven't actually done it, but I've read about it in the news, and I have seen porn. I've used to see Playboy when I was a young man growing up. I mean, that magazine doesn't really exist anymore. I loved looking at Playboy, and I have no shame. One thing I can say, I really understand the Garden of Eden mythology. The God of the Bible was a liberated God and wanted us to make love and have orgasms and make babies. That's the way I read the Garden of Eden incident. Once they took in the knowledge of judgment, they were ashamed of their nudity, and then made fig leaves and they covered up their bodies because they started judging. They judged them. Self-judgment. Shame is something God didn't want. But even Playboy magazine can't survive today because of the pornography. Because why did men and women read Playboy magazine? It also had incredible articles, not just about sex and making out. It had political articles. It was a great magazine overall, but we lost it, right? Because today everyone's selling themselves on their webcam and they're charging money for it, and they go all the way, and some of them are, what I understand is, if a person is doing this on their webcam and they are in a relationship, they're no longer attractive, so nobody cares about them anymore. Isn't that interesting? They want to believe that person is somehow available to them, and they make a lot of money. Some of them make millions. It's really sad. This is what we're doing.
They're making money, but at what cost to themselves? And see, there's always the paradox there that but
yeah, but then again, then there are young people today. I mean, I'm trying to educate my daughters about holding hands in the kiss. This is what I talk to them about, because my oldest daughter will be a teenager, and she's gone through phases where she talks about boys, and she actually had one experience where this boy, she like touched her on the top of the head, and she said, I've never felt anything like that in my life. That's what I want my children to. I want them to grow up with the same sensitivity that I had, that even a touch can ignite a supernatural ecstasy in the head or the heart and the hands, and eventually the sex organs, because we're a whole complete being. So the love, and there's different levels of ecstasy in the body. There is I would still say that the final climax of sex is a crude ecstasy compared to supernatural bliss, but it's still fantastic, and it's still wonderful, and it still creates life. That's why I have my daughters today, because of my wife and I joining in this ecstatic union. But at my age, I prefer the supernatural bliss. I find it actually irritating when desire arises in my body at this age, because I lost my wife in a very tragic way. So I don't I don't really like it when it happens, but it's still there. It's much weaker. God, when I was a teenager in high school, I couldn't think about what I was learning. I was looking at the girls in the class. I think that's how all the boys were. That's all we talked about. And I don't know what the girls talked about, but I know what we talked about. And that excitement and that so how, Emma, do we get people to awaken the sensitivity in their nervous system? Because there was an article I sent you.
But that's the thing. People have been numbed, haven't they, through,
Right.
Even alcohol or, other substance
Drugs.
abuse. And then even just on a mental level and emotional level, there's so many levels of numbing, and it's just, increasing, I think, as the stress levels rise in society, so does the numbness.
You see, it says during a kiss, this is in the article I sent you, the lip sensitivity causes our brain to create a chemical cocktail that can give us a natural high. This cocktail is made up of 3 chemicals. You see how they try to get it all the way down to chemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin. Like any cocktail, this one has an array of side effects. So, but they're missing the energy part of it, because all chemicals and chemical reactions release and absorb energy, electricity, electromagnetic frequencies. They forgot that part, because every chemical is photosensitive, which is sensitive, and it's heat sensitive and cold sensitive. So we're not just chemicals, we're energy. And yes, there's a chemical part of it, but chemicals are crystals that release and absorb electromagnetic energy. So I know science tries to, nail it down to 3 chemicals, because what can you do? Can you give somebody dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin? You can give them things to eat
it's
that
another
will
version of religion, isn't it? To separate people from the divine aspect of
right.
the kiss, of sexuality, of connection. Science and religion, two just different aspects. All right, David, wrap it up for us, please. How would you like to
wrapping
conclude
it
this
up. Well,
fascinating? We've been everywhere. You gave me
it's
the
funny that
topic, and I purposely didn't want to start talking to you about it. And I was thinking, is it like the kiss of love, the kiss of life, the kiss of death, the kiss of enlightenment, or are we going to talk for 90 minutes about kissing? So it's really
well, we did it.
you did it. It's amazing. But yeah, so wrap it
My
up.
little story. There's nothing
Daria.
like the joy that your child gives you, and she started with a kiss. That's all I can tell you.
There you
The
go.
greatest, to me, the greatest purpose to kiss and make love is to have a child, because your child is you. Your nervous system resonates. You experience everything they experience. Everything she does all day. We've been at the beach, swimming in the water with her life vest on, and all the joy she experiences in the sand. I feel all of it, because I'm plugged into my children, and that to create life, to co-create life with the Creator God and my wife is the ultimate climax. Is not the orgasm, it's the child. Right. And the incredible joy. So with that, I'll say good night.
So that kiss, the kiss lives forever through her. And your other daughter. Yeah. How beautiful.
Have a great night, Emma. Thanks for doing this. I can't wait to see how many views we get on this. I want to beat those dog and cat videos.
Let people know where they can find you, David.
They can find me and my frequency healing work at my name, David Sereda, SEREDA.co, like company, davidsereda.co, davidsereda.co, davidsereda.co. Okay, have a great night. Let's talk to you again.
Thanks, guys. Bye.